Hello, I'm Chris Flisher, and welcome to Turning of the Wheel, an intelligent, lively discussion about astrology, art, and spiritual adventure. Timing is everything, and as the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed. Join me as I explore concepts that allow us to broaden our view of the world. You'll hear interesting topics, meet fascinating guests, and discover who you really are. Using the time-tested practices of astrology, you'll learn how to accept change as the great wheel of life turns. Astrology, art, and spiritual adventure on Turning of the Wheel TV with Chris Flisher. Hello and welcome to Turning of the Wheel. My name's Chris Flisher, and as you know, this is a show about astrology. I got a great guest here today joining me from the West Coast, no less, and we're going to have a great conversation about her book called The Venus Star Rising. Fantastic story, amazing little known point about astrology that not many people who understand astrology really fully understand. So we're going to try to graze the surface of this topic. It's a big topic and it's a fabulous book, as you can see, a big thick book. And her name is Arielle Guttman, and she's here from California to be on the show today. Welcome to the show.
Thank
Arielle.
you, Chris. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. I'm so happy that you're able to come here. It was good through the good fortune of a number of astrological alignments as well as connections that we were able to get her on today. So it's a great honor to have her here. We're going to talk about her book called The Venus Star Rising. Fabulous book, filled with interesting topics. So give us the sort of the introduction to what is the Venus Star Rising and why is it an important point in our astrology charts?
Okay, I'll do my best to do the elevator speech.
It can be a long elevator.
Okay, so Venus, actually our planet Venus, little known fact, orbits in a 5-pointed star. And it takes 8 years to do this. It actually makes 2 stars in 8 years, but let's say for practical purposes here, a 5-pointed star in 8 years, which is a 5-8 ratio. It's the Fibonacci sequence. It's a 1.6 value. It's a beautiful, harmonious value. Mm-hmm. And if you look at some of the graphics in the book, you'll find that modern technology, telescopes, computer graphics, things like that, have been able to depict Venus, the actual planet Venus now, the way the ancients always thought of her, as the most harmonious, as the most beautiful, as the most perfect goddess planet in the solar system and or in the pantheon. And what I thought was astounding was that modern science really confirms this by breaking down her orbital frequency, that she really is about harmony and beauty and love and what makes us feel good, and of course the principle of love. And this Venus star is about connections. So in a bigger sense, it's about relationships, but I think in a more personal sense, it's what makes us feel good, with or without relationships. It's about where your Venus star point is, and it's astrologically based depending on the orbiting position of the star. Mm-hmm. What particular sign you have it in and how it's connected to the other signs on the star when you were born really shows an innate talent of yours that you know that you have. You may not know how great it is that you have it, but other people will recognize it in you and comment about it. Mm-hmm. You know how you always admire other people for certain things that they do.
Right. Yeah.
So it's an kind of inborn frequency, let's call it a frequency.
Frequency is a good word, attribute, frequency. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That is sort of planted in you, usually prior to your birth, within the 9-month cycle mm-hmm. that you were born in, because it changes star points every 9 months.
What I love about Venus is this precision piece of it, which you mentioned in your opening comments about the frequency with which it operates at. It's very mathematical and geometrically based. Mm-hmm. And I know that when I was reading years ago about Venus and its role in the history of the world, no less, if it weren't for Venus, they wouldn't have been able to understand longitude and latitude. That was a key point of it because they were able to triangulate. When they discovered Venus, they were able to use that as a third point between the sun and the moon and Venus. Mm-hmm. They were able to form a triangulation, which then gave them the ability to map across the planet and find out where we were, which was a big aid in navigation.
Venus is so much more important than really even sometimes astrologers give credit for. everybody's talking about Saturn all the time,
Yeah.
Uranus, Pluto, whatever. But it is a sister planet to Earth, and I think you're right with the longitude, but also this particular star of Venus is not just Venus alone, it's the Earth-Venus dance around the sun. It's what the two of them do together. So as they're moving, you know, like Earth is moving at one speed and Venus might be moving at another, but every so often they come together and go boom. That's called the kiss of Venus.
Huh.
And then one of them passes the other and the other one's a little bit slower, and then they come back together again and boom. Well, these two little booms or kisses, 5 of them sequentially over an 8-year period makes this beautiful pattern.
Which is the 5-pointed star. Yeah, which is the 5-pointed star. Once again, I'll show that. That's just this same star that we're referring to here. This actual, what we think of in traditional, conventional wisdom, that's a star. When we show it in graphically, this represents that 5-pointed angle. This is a mathematical precision thing that just amazes us, I think, amazes me and probably yourself,
yeah,
as to the logic of the universe. I mean, how does this thing happen so perfectly? It's like eclipses for me. It's the same
not
sort of,
random.
No, I know. That's what I love about it. And the fact that it is so precise and is measurable and repeatable. I just love that. I mean, it just says, wow, there's something really logical here.
There is. Mathematicians love this. In fact, the phi ratio is a number, a value that mathematicians love, artists love, designers love. So whether you're coming from art or science, it is a beautiful value or equation. Musicians love it because it is the musical scale as well. But I think what intrigued me the most about it is not just that it makes this beautiful 5-pointed star. Okay, that's lovely enough. But then when you start measuring it in people's lives, it actually means something.
Yeah,
it really defines time periods in your life when important things happen. Births and deaths and new relationships, beginnings of relationships, endings of relationships. You know, you could track your whole life just from this Venus star, like the major points, the major ups and downs.
And when you say track, are you talking about a specific point where the sun and where the Venus and the Earth are at that moment in time?
Yeah.
That the events would happen?
Since it's Venus and the Earth that make these star points, it's and it moves. It doesn't keep going back to the same point over and over again. So it's like this 5-pointed star is created in time. When you were born, it's at a certain position, but it moves through the zodiac very slowly in kind of a clockwise way, really, really slowly, so that through your lifetime, it's moving like a clock. All 5 points of the star are moving, but then they're connecting with different things in your natal chart, or different things, let's say, in the universal chart, the world chart, what I call it, which is just like the transit of the star now. And so it hooks up with different things, different planets, different signs, and we can I've very much assigned meaning to that, been able to see that it's quite a phenomenon.
Now you mentioned the word phi, P-H-I. That is the 1.6?
Yeah.
That's the same angle, that's the same numerical derivative, I guess, or whatever, the same mathematical formula that you use for the sequence, Fibonacci numbers, and the golden section or the golden mean.
Yeah, they're based on the 1.6 also.
We'll have to talk about that again sometime, yeah.
See, where you really break it down is 1 year on Earth is 365 days. 1 cycle of Venus around is 584 days.
Okay,
so if you take the number 584 and divide it by 365, you get 1.6. And so every measurement between Earth and Venus comes down to this 1.6. Now all the planets have beautiful orbits. They all have patterns, but nobody has this 5-pointed star. Nobody has this perfect phi ratio the way that Venus does, and that's the number of harmony.
So if you take this same sort of this mathematical pattern that you've been talking about, and you run it through and speed it up, you can see an actual flower develop like you would see with a spirograph or something like that. You can see this sort of mandala-like quality of this flower emerge.
Right.
And that is a beautiful thing, and we see it in many different parts of our lives. But the fact that it's there and so clearly relevant, and it's just fascinating to see that.
It was very moving to me when I first saw that. When I first saw and really understood the depth at which Venus does this and Earth together. We can't forget Earth, but the Venus-Earth dance. And some books have called it the kiss of the sun. There was a little book that came out probably, when would it have been? Late 90s, early 2000s, called A Little Book of Coincidence.
Oh, I've seen that.
Do you remember that?
I think I have that.
Lovely sacred geometry in that of all the planets. And it was, one of the things he said about Venus, called it the kiss of Venus with this 5-pointed star, but also, you know, the things they don't teach you in school. And maybe they are now, but I know they didn't teach when I was going to school, but hopefully they are now. Some of this geometry, and it gets us into the geometry of astrology, because really, if you're working with astrology, aren't you using geometry anyway?
All the time. It is the root basis of that. And we're going to do another show at some point in time discussing the sacred geometry quality of this.
I'd love
but I think
that,
what I love about this is that when we think of Venus as an archetype in the pantheon of astrology, we always refer to the love part or the beauty part. And when you see that sequence and the flower begins to emerge from the geometry of the planets circling around in that 1.6, and we see that image just come up to the future, to the present, we can totally understand that it is completely about beauty. What else could it be? It's just, it symbolizes beauty in itself.
Right. And I've seen it, you know, it's more than just the love of one human being for another or falling in love. It is that, but it's the love of, it's, you know, the Greeks had many, many words for love. I think in English we only have love. But the Greeks had many different words to describe different kinds of love. But this is an all-encompassing love that that inspires a person from inside. It inspires them to live their life. It's the most creative part of their life. What gives them joy? What brings them beauty? And that love can be the birth of a child. That love can be, you know, the service that they're performing in their daily life, their work, their career, whatever, or to another human being. It can be for people. Sometimes they're dedicated to a more universal principle, the love of animals, the love of the earth, the love of whatever.
It's sort of our reason to be. I mean, it's our raison d'etre. It's what brings us joy. And through the creativity process, through the creative process is where we really find our true reason to be, as I said. It's really where we find our true purpose, I think. And it's a great expression, and we all need it and love it, and it's great to have it. It's interesting, when this information came to you, you had to do quite a bit of research. This is a hefty book that you've written here, a lot of information in here, and so you've been able to track points in time when Venus and the Sun hit that, sort of like you mentioned earlier, that kiss, that love kiss, or whatever you call it. When they two are aligned, that is considered a Venus star point. So that happens every 1.6 years, you said, right?
The retrograde of Venus happens 1.6 years, and that's the beginning of her cycle.
Right. Okay.
So we're in it, you know, every 1.6 years we're in it. And she comes to right before the retrograde. If your listeners are following retrograde patterns, especially of Venus, towards the last month of that 584 days cycle of Venus, she's ending the last phase, and then she's looping into the retrograde, and in that loop she's letting go of the last phase and then picking up new material from her kiss with the Sun, and her kiss with Earth to the Sun. They're all three lined up, and then her task is to bring that out, to unfold that for the coming 1.6 years.
So it's kind of like a birthing process.
Yeah, exactly.
Very
each
maternal.
time we're like in that. So like in the middle of a Venus retrograde, you're really, it's something beautiful that's actually happening. It's the letting go of 1.6 years ago and the beginning of the next 1.6 years, what you might bring into fruition, or focus on in a very, you know, committed love, what you invest in. We call Venus our value systems, and I think of it as a personal investment. We usually invest in what we believe in, what we love, what we feel good about.
What we're drawn to, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So I think it's always a good time to review. I think in the Venus retrograde process, it's always a good time to review what are we invested in, and does it still hold the magic for us that It did.
So that's true for almost any retrograde. I always think of retrogrades as an opportunity to put the prefix RE in front of whatever you're thinking about. So review, reconsider, reinvest, all those things. The same is true for the Mercury retrogrades, I always refer to that, or even the Mars retrogrades, and you take those attributes. But for Venus, it could be a deepening of a relationship. It could be a reconsideration of, well, maybe we should get married, or maybe we should do this, and it has that sense of optimism and sort of expansiveness about it, which I love.
So you could think of that as renewal, because I often think of Venus retrogrades as either it's time to really seriously consider letting this relationship go, or it's a time to renew our commitment, renew our vows, renew our contract with one another. Because Venus in the astrological wheel, you know, it rules the second house, the seventh house. So I think it shows up more with second house things like, what are my economic ties or my financial commitments in this relationship? And it doesn't even have to be a love relationship. That can be my financial commitments to my work life, what I'm invested in, a house, something, your children, whatever, that you might say during the Venus retrograde, the parents might say to the children, or vice versa, okay, time to renew our contract now, let's see, let's see how long we want to put this, but it is relationships, because it's seventh house, but it's not always love relationships. It could be whatever you're invested into.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah.
And it has a certain maternal quality to it, I think. It's a very strong maternal quality, because we're talking about relationships, and those relationships are all based on our first relationship, which was with our parents, our mothers. Fascinating subject. When you look back over your own particular life, and before you knew about this particular characteristic of Venus, does it match up with your life in key points and times?
Yes, and I wasn't recognizing the point at which it's in my life, the star point of mine, the zodiac sign. I have other planets there and important things in my chart, but I wasn't giving that part of my life enough credit, enough attention. I was basically saying, oh yeah, it's there, but I'll get to that later or something. And once I saw how the Venus star point was there, I realized I have to start using this more. I have to start acknowledging it more, because I started realizing, reflecting back on it, that the things that people had always said to me about what they admired in me was so directly connected to my Venus star point. It wasn't to my sun or my moon or...
It really illuminated that part of your life, and it made more sense. It clicked.
And I realized, well, yes, I do have talent in that area. I have been using that all my life, and I haven't always been aware that I've been using it.
Do you think, as a universal sort of statement, that Venus does point to that part in everybody's chart? That it points to their talents, per se?
I think most of the people I've looked at, yeah.
I mean, so somebody who may be, say, in banking or finance, I mean, you would think of them, perhaps, or maybe maybe engineering, something that's a little bit more hard, fast, and sort of, rigid. Would the creativity of Venus come through in that capacity, I guess? Or, I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is...
I haven't studied those people as much. For the book, I was really looking at artists and entertainers, musicians, because Venus really comes through music and art and creativity that way.
Interesting.
But I have looked at political figures. I think I asked my nephews to throw in a few important sports figures that they thought were important
Which
for
you would
me,
think would
because
be,
I don't know that world.
Right, you'd think that would be more Mars-oriented.
You would, but for instance, I have done Michael Phelps' chart, and
the swimmer.
Some of the Olympic athletes, which I do follow, and tennis, Venus Williams and her sister Serena. They are stunning examples. Venus Williams, and her middle name is Ebony Star.
Wow.
Venus Ebony Star, which means black star, Williams, was born on the day of a Venus star point, or Kazemi, okay, or very close to it, really close to it. And I'm thinking, how did her parents know that this Venus star was happening on the day she was born, and what a star she was going to become? And
that is amazing, because I'm sure her parents, we don't know this, but pretty sure her parents did not follow astrology.
No, no. And I actually had somebody in an audience at one of my workshops who would have known that culture maybe and how she was raised, and would have said, chances are no. Maybe a grandmother could have been influential in that, but very doubtful that they were following the planets.
Yeah, so people who are born at these points, these star points, when the Sun and Venus are what's called the Kazemi. Can you explain the Kazemi real quickly for people?
Yeah, so when a planet gets within 10 degrees of the Sun, it's called combust, which means that the Sun's light is so bright it kind of burns out the rays of the other planets, so they're not felt as strongly. I actually have a little problem with that theory, because I actually think the closer a planet gets to the Sun, the more it wants to express itself.
Brightens,
yeah, right. And in the shining, the Sun is actually shining on it.
Right,
kind
and
of
so giving it an extra boost.
Right,
its
right.
influence is greater.
So I've seen that myself. But when it moves into a quarter of a degree, like within 15 minutes of arc, it's called Kazemi, Kazimi. That's an Arabic word from our great body of astrology that came from Arabic astrologers. When Europe was in the Dark Ages, Arabic astrology and mathematics and science and astronomy were just off the charts. They were making a lot of discoveries and working with a lot of different principles that we still use today in math and science and astronomy and astrology, and navigation and all of that. But so it's an Arabic word called Kazemi, and I love to say it. I just think
it's got a nice ring to it, yeah.
Boom, Kazemi. Yeah, so that's when it's so close. And one person explained it this way: when a planet is combust, the Sun is like the king, and when a planet is combust, you're just in the court of the king. You may be in the same room, but nobody's looking at you because they're all looking at the king. Right?
Right.
But when you're Kazemi, the king has singled you out, called you up, you're sitting right next to him, or you're actually sitting on his lap or whatever, and then all eyes are on you. Then all the attention is on you because you are right there in the Sun. Another example besides Venus, Ebony Star Williams, born on or near the Kazemi, is Oprah Winfrey.
Ah, you mentioned her. Yeah, that's a fascinating story.
Aquarius star. Now, Venus was the Gemini star. Venus Williams is the Gemini star. And that takes, for tennis, that makes sense. It takes a lot of agility, flexibility,
quick thinking,
strength, quick,
that's very
this
Gemini-like.
way, that way,
yeah.
like movements, all of that. And her sister's an Aries star point.
Okay, that makes sense. And they're both, that's action and getting things done.
And her sister, Serena, is more slam dunk,
exactly.
And really more of a hard-hitting kind of Aries. But it's funny because the Gemini constellation is the twins, and I've noticed more Gemini star points having a sibling, a real important relationship with the sibling.
And they definitely have that relationship, especially to be two professional tennis players in the same family is just phenomenal, I think.
And what are the odds of that?
Yeah, I know. And to be so successful.
Yeah, and it's the same with Oprah.
But
what
Oprah
are the
really
odds of
fascinates
a
me.
poor black child, growing up in the South with not that much advantage or opportunity?
Actually, many things stacked against her, probably.
Coming to be the queen, pretty much, of the world, of she's broken every record for,
and
I
she's
know
known
they
by her
measure
name,
things.
by her single name.
Exactly.
Oprah. Everybody knows Oprah.
Oprah, yeah.
And so she was born under this alignment. And
on
so
an
she
exact Kazemi, in Aquarius.
In Aquarius. So she carries a real strong messenger card, so
She's
to
the
speak.
voice.
She's the voice.
She's the
right.
voice.
And for the globe.
And the airwaves.
For the airwaves, of course. Very
and
Aquarian.
I've always called her, the queen of the airwaves.
Yeah.
And then seeing that Kazemi operate so purely and so sort of naturally, this is what I mean. You couldn't try to be Oprah. I mean, if you studied your whole life and did everything she's done, you couldn't possibly be what she is, because she's got that quality of that Kazemi built into her, of Venus shining through so strongly that there is such a magnetism, there is such an aura that radiates that you can't possibly deny.
It's part of her demeanor, and she just carries. And I love what she's done for literature and authors, and bringing the books back into the world, and helping people who, you know, literature in our day and times is at risk in some ways.
Right.
For some people, but for her to bring that back, and for her to have this presence and this very optimistic, sort of large global view of the world and how to empower people and make your lives better. And she's been very much involved in Eastern religions and Eastern philosophies, and really incorporating that. She's been a real champion, and she has this Kazemi. She was born at the Kazemi.
Born with it, yeah.
Are there other people that come to mind who have a similar?
Well, I was going to mention Michael Phelps in the
Phelps,
sports
yeah.
world. He's been decorated more than anyone else as an Olympian athlete, and he has an Aries star point in an exact square to the Aries ruling planet Mars.
Oh, so there's the drive.
And Mars is up in the 10th of career and profession, conjunct his sun in Cancer. And what I find interesting about that is Cancer's a water sign, so he's a swimmer.
Swimmer, right.
Okay,
and he's got Mars
fast.
driving it.
He's a fast swimmer. He moves fast through water, and he's been decorated for it 17 times.
Yeah, broke all records. So he's a perfect example. That shows the Mars energy, the sort of the athletic drive, combined with the Cancer water vehicle.
Right.
And then he has this wonderful thing, and he also has that same thing. So this is sort of a kiss that people receive, and they're born at that time.
It's a big kiss.
Yeah.
When Venus kisses you like that, don't ignore it.
It's fascinating. It really is fascinating. I think it's just such an amazing topic when you think about it, because and then when you see this, or anybody who's born with this at this point in time, so this would people who would be born anytime the sun, and there are specific dates when the two are aligned, right? And those are, you can track through an ephemeris.
Exactly, and it's in the book, all the dates. You can look up your own star date. And
Yeah.
Of course, everybody wants to know their own star point and how that works for them.
Of course.
We're not always born on or near the Kazemis. I'm not, but I'm still using my star point in a very powerful way.
And when you know that point, you can recognize it. You can see the transits of the planets touching it, and you can see events unfolding, and you know that it's opportune time to be artistic or whatever, express yourself. Interesting.
Right. So, you know, it's just, I mean, and more keeps coming out of it. This whole star mechanism of Venus. I don't know if your viewers, if this is going to show up on the camera, but I'm going to show this graphic, and maybe they can see it, maybe they can't. But this is a perfect example of the 5 signs that it's in right now. The transiting signs are Aries, Capricorn, Scorpio, Leo, and Gemini. And then certain degrees within those signs. So if any of those 5 signs are actually prominent in your chart, and you know that, you're getting influenced by the current transiting Venus star.
Interesting. So there really is a lot to be said for it. And it's a whole new data point. This is sort of not what we would consider traditional astrology, people who have just a little bit of knowledge about this, but it's incredibly valuable, I think, for planning and knowing when this is going to be impacting your life. And when you do a typical reading, you will give people their Venus star points, and so they can be cognizant of them. And it's a special reading just for that.
I now begin and end all my sessions with the Venus star, and sometimes we don't even get to the rest of the planets because the Venus star, planting all the Venus star points around their wheel is enough to give them what they're seeking, what they're looking for.
My guest today has been Arielle Guttman, and she is the author of Venus Star Rising, a fascinating discovery of Venus and how important it is in your chart. Thank you so much for coming down today.
It's been a pleasure, Chris. Thank you for having me.
That's great. Thank you.